obvious, but when you're in the trenches, as you were with that particular test, it's not assured. In my observation, a lot of creative people, if not most, are very conflict averse. Can you dig back into that a little bit more about how you see that getting in the way of doing more impactful work when people are who have great ideas, they're not assured of success before them, they're just afraid of the conflict and they back away?
So there's a film that Nancy and I used to start some of the aversion to conflict workshop stuff that we do. And it shows a creative team birthing an idea, and that idea just being beaten to death by, everyone from the creative director to the client to the research, you name it. And that very, very compromised thing goes into this awards show that Nancy actually happened to be chairing that year, and it doesn't win because, it's had the crap kicked out of it. And we generally start the conversation with the people in the workshop by saying, who was responsible for that outcome? And everyone says all the obvious things. And what they don't say is the creative team was largely responsible, because at no point did they say no. At no point did they take the idea off the table. At no point did they say, we don't accept the criticism, or if we make that change, the idea will be, irreparably ruined. And I do think it's quite common that you're right, that creatives mostly want to be agreeable. It seems to be our job to get the work through, and I'm not sure that we always put the highest premium on making sure that the quality of the work that we get through is paramount. So it's hard, and creatives often are quite introverted people, and that makes it that much harder for them to stand up and fight for things, and to know how to fight effectively. So a lot of the work that we do in our current career is just about that very thing.
We literally do a workshop on how to say no.
And I imagine that's fairly gender neutral.
It is. It is. We
all
feel
have.
We feel women have even a harder go of it because we're so groomed to be pleasers and to say yes. So there's a little bit even more of a challenge for women, but definitely the men show up with the same dilemma, and there's a lot of fear around it. People are afraid they're going to pay a price. So we try to help put that in context and help them recognize there's a bigger price to pay for actually not going ahead and stepping into the conflict and living with putting your real true feelings in front of people in a way that they can hear.
One of the things, and you touched on this, both of you have touched on this, but one of the things I've admired about at least reading about your work and the approach that you have taken, even starting out with the litmus test, is putting an emphasis on results and not awards. Is this work going to be impactful and effective? And it seems like a lot of people sabotage long-term victories of having an impact by opting for a lot of short-term wins of just getting stuff through. And not only does it not win awards, but it seems like it really doesn't have the impact.
It's Nancy speaking. I think that people do self-sabotage by making an agenda to, first and foremost, look good in front of your peers and win awards. Something that can be kind of hijacking, taking a longer view, and ultimately finding greater success when we really make our goal to come up with the most interesting solution to a problem. And we think at our best, we are all creative problem solvers. And our clients have ultimately usually a fairly tough problem to solve. So we would have to observe that if you do a really, really great job of, if you find a really successful way of solving a problem, it will be so good that it's award winning. So we think awards are actually wonderful, and every industry has them. Advertising does too. There's nothing wrong with having that tangible evidence of having done something exceptional. We just think there's a much more effective route to getting them that is much more likely to mean you get great results as well as creative excellence. So we always told our clients when we were CCOs that having awards should be something they're interested in. In fact, the world's greatest shows, there's all kinds of evidence that work is more successful. It's generally going to be have much greater ability to break through the clutter. It's going to make people sit up and notice. It's the kind of work that people actually want to engage in, as opposed to most work, which of course the average consumer is running away from and avoiding at all costs. So yeah, we're often in a position to coach people, and always did, really, on let's all smarten up here. Let's not get thrown off course by having a pointed goal of going after what we believe is the thing that will have the most check marks with judges.
I want to add one thing to that, which is our own experience. We worked a lot on brands that people thought of as no-hopers. And before the Dove Litmus test, for example, Dove work had very strong convention around it, and that was the way you did things, and not in a million years would that work have been award-winning. And then in breaking all of those rules and doing what we did, to everyone's shock and surprise, including our own, Dove won a Cannes Lion. That Litmus test won a Cannes Lion. And all of a sudden, the kind of brand or product that people didn't think was an opportunity brand suddenly became perceived as an opportunity. So Nancy and I, if we had a specialty as a creative team, it was taking those kind of no-hopers and solving them in interesting ways that did lead to a lot of recognition. So we never shared the view that there's no hope on anything, because we made careers doing exactly that.
This is a two-part question for you to expand on as you can, but you talked about the development of creative talent. What are some of the biggest mistakes that creative people make in their careers, and what are the shifts that those talented, creative-minded people need to make to become more effective leaders, not just creative talents?
So I'll say the very first thing that needs to happen is they need to stop thinking of their own output as the most important thing. We're creative people in agency land are raised up to believe that what they produce is the apex of what a career has to offer. And you are rewarded for your fame, and your salary is attached to your fame. So you put all your energy and all your effort into creating something that makes you look good. And all of a sudden, you get to that point where you are successful enough, and though there's no evidence that you ought to be leading anything, you get kicked into these jobs where suddenly you're the creative director, and you don't know how to do it. And because everything in your life has told you to focus on yourself and your own output, it's very, very hard to shift your gaze to creating conditions that help other people do well. And so that's one of the very first things we ever work on in Swim with new people in senior jobs is how they make the shift from what we call me to we, because being a great creative director is about other people. It's not about you.
Yeah, it's funny how often we see people really not knowing any better than to stay stuck in the role they had before, the leadership role. And that people get stuck, I think of it as being stuck in the weeds. So they can stay too grounded in what they used to do, which interferes with other people's growth. They're not good at delegating. They don't trust others right away to do the job to the level they think they should, and bad things ensue. And one of the things that people need to wrap their heads around is that there is a new way of measuring their success when they are in a leadership role, and the tough thing is it's invisible. What they do, if they do a really great job as a leader, it's not a thing that you put on a shelf or that you play online, or that's on a screen. It is all those things you're doing to help others that are grounded in conversations that happen, that are happening behind the scenes that aren't visible to others. So it can feel like there's no, based on the old reward system, where's the reward? I don't see my value being played back to me the way I'm used to. And so that's a funny kind of a struggle that people aren't mindful about. And that's one of those things we try to help people to see that's just not visible to them. Is, you're stuck back here in your behavior because you're not recognizing there's a different value system now. And people will fall on their faces if they don't start recognizing that they really need to shift those energies, get out of the old mode of I'm going to create stuff. Of course, there are a lot of creative leaders that still do stuff too, that are still creating the work, but they need to put a lot more energy into the not creating the work part.
Let's loop back into the we versus me and some of the other lessons that you've acquired while you've been working in terms of mentoring, because a lot of your lessons have come trial by fire. Janet, I believe, told about mentoring a young copywriter and then ended up having kind of a pistol to her own head dealing with that. You've learned a lot of life lessons in there. Things like what if you develop people and they leave, and some of the other lessons in mentoring that you've acquired and that you're continuing to pass on.
I think that mentoring is one of these lost arts in agencies in particular, partly because nobody has time and partly because people don't always see the value. And one of the things that we learned out of it that I think applies especially to women is that women don't love to throw themselves into the breach and say, I'm going to take on that hard thing. I want to be promoted, or, they just want to do the work and be recognized for it and believe somewhere inside of them that it's a meritocracy. So that when the opportunity comes along and they don't feel ready, then they are not likely to take it. But if you actively mentor people, and we are living examples of this, you learn all kinds of leadership skills through kind of an organic journey, which is to say you learn how to have hard conversations with people. You learn how to inspire them. You learn how to help them make their work better. You learn how to show them the way, which in essence is what leadership is, but there isn't all this pressure on it. So that's a really, like, we call it selfish mentoring, because in the end, it benefits you as much, and in some cases more, maybe, than it benefits the person that you're holding out your hand to. And so that's a really big piece of what happened as a result of mentoring for us.
Dig, if you will, a little bit more into the listening is power thought, as well as how to stand out for what you don't say. Because I think a lot of times creative people have a lot of ideas, they have a lot, thought, and they just go in and walk over or burst into a meeting and kind of overpower without stopping and listening, hearing, getting the full brief, if you will. And you dig into a lot of that in your work.
It's Nancy speaking. it's funny. Listening skills is something that has become